Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're doing a step-by-step tutorial on how to make this viral ghost pumpkin. I've been getting a lot of comments on my Instagram and my YouTube channel asking how I did it, and I thought a YouTube video would be better. Here's a list of supplies you're going to need. You can find them at Target, Michael's, Walmart, any craft store really. These pumpkins were inspired by the bigger ones you see in the background, and instead of sculpting the eyes and the mouth, this time around we're going to carve them out. I decided to make the face that I wanted on a piece of paper and cut it out and tape it on and trace it because I tried to draw it on the pumpkin and it was not working at all. I also ended up drawing out what I wanted the drips to look like, or the sheet rather, and I ended up changing it, but it's still a good idea to do that when you're working with the clay as well because it gives you the chance to kind of see what it's going to look like. Also, don't forget to cut out a hole in the bottom that I showed earlier. Right now, I'm going to be lightly sanding the pumpkin because this gives the clay something to adhere to, otherwise it'll just completely lift off, and we don't want that. Here's what it looks like after. Make sure you're wearing the proper PPE and in a well-ventilated area. You do not want to be breathing this stuff in. I know there's a lot of crafts out there that kind of don't really share the necessary steps to be safe, but please make sure when you're following DIYs, you are following like safety instructions. Moving on, you're going to be working with the air dry clay. You're going to flatten it and then roll it out so you can create a sheet for your pumpkin. I have these ruler guides. I think I got them from Home Depot, but they're unnecessary. You don't need them. I only have them because I work with clay on my Etsy shop and I use them every single day. After you roll out the clay, you're going to want to trace out your sheet. You can use a toothpick, scissors, a pen, something that can just kind of cut through the clay, and then after that you're going to fit it to your pumpkin, and then you're going to cut the stem. You see I'm kind of rolling it a little bit more there, but anyway, so this is how it should look after you kind of gauge what it's going to look like and you cut it through the stem and put it over top of the pumpkin. You're also going to want to kind of cut out holes for the eyes and the mouth that you had made, and then you're going to start pinching the clay inwards and taking out the excess through the hole on the bottom that we made for the tea light. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is just for fun, a fun little activity for you to try with yourself or your friends, whatever you want. But anyway, so I am just removing the excess clay. I'm just cutting it, peeling it, removing it, and then anytime you see if there's like a gap in your clay, you don't have to worry because you can always add more on with water. So after you've pressed all of your clay on, we can start smoothing it out. And also for the drippings, you can also cut it with like an X-Acto knife or a toothpick, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, to kind of get those drippings the way that you want it. That's kind of how I also did it here, but I didn't show it. But anyway, so in order to smooth it out and get those little lines that you see me here, I'm using water. I'm putting it on my thumb, I'm making sure that there's not too much, and then I'm pressing into the clay, and I just repeat that process over and over. It's really fun, I really love it. But then again, I do work with clay for a living. Please make sure you take your time and you have fun. This isn't supposed to be some strenuous task. This is supposed to be some fun activity, and make sure you can use enough water but not too much, because if you put too much water it can increase the cracking, and that is just something to do with air dry clay in general. You can also take an X-Acto knife and then cut out what you want for the drippings, as I did there, and then you can take a paper towel, a damp paper towel, and then wipe off the excess clay on the bottoms of the drippings. So now moving on to kind of the most taxing part of the air dry clay process is when it dries and it starts to crack. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to take your leftover air dry clay and mix it with some water to create a paste-like consistency. So you see how I have too much water there? You don't need that much. I just did that because I wanted to make sure it wouldn't dry out when I wasn't using it. And this mixture is called clay slip. Essentially, it's used to attach clay pieces, but in this case, we're going to be using it to fill cracks as our air dry clay on our pumpkin is drying. This clay specifically dries white, and as you can see, it did crack very much, and that is okay. You can just take your clay slip and fill in those cracks. Part of the reason why air dry clay cracks is because when it's wet, it's a bit more flexible, but as it dries, it tends to constrict and it'll crack. Or sometimes it's drying on the outside faster than it is drying on the inside, and that will also cause cracking. However, I will say just because your clay project cracks doesn't mean that it's not necessarily fixable. As I showed you here, it definitely cracked all over and I ended up fixing it with clay slip. You do not want to put just paint over it because that will not ensure that your project will be okay. You definitely want to fill in those cracks with more clay so that it can have a better structure. And if it does crack more, don't get discouraged because so did mine, and this one was almost completely dry and it still cracked, and I just ended up filling it in with more clay and it ended up looking totally fine. It is a process, it is a labor of love, but I think it's totally worth it, especially if it's something that you can keep for a couple years. And a lot of people have been asking me how to seal it. I still haven't quite figured that out because I usually keep my air dry clay projects inside, or they haven't been this big, and typically you would want to seal it with something like UV resin or epoxy resin, but you would need to wear, proper PPE and follow safety instructions. So after your pumpkin is completely dried, you filled in all the cracks, you can sand it if you'd like. I ended up sanding mine because I just wanted to sand it because I felt like it was a little rough. And then I also decided that I didn't like how the sheet looked, so I ended up cutting it out some more with an X-Acto knife, which I really appreciate. That took a lot longer, like it was an additional step that you don't need to do. But anyway, here's how it looks. And remember, we had created a hole at the bottom to put a fake LED candle, and that is exactly what I'm gonna do. Also, I ended up painting the stem like a brown black mixture, and then I dabbed it with a paper towel while the paint was still wet to give it a little bit of texture, and that is how it looks. If you end up trying it, make sure you tag me on Instagram and TikTok. I would love to see it. I also have these little ghost holding pumpkins on my Etsy shop, link below. Make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.